Hello and happy June. We are continuing our 90 days to our first draft, and you are writing. And today I want to talk about storytelling. There are many elements that you can put in your book, right? Summaries and quizzes, and there's so many elements. Storytelling, though, I think is one of the most important elements that you're going to put in your nonfiction book. Hence, I want to talk about storytelling specifically, because I want to make sure you get some stories into your book. So, and the question obviously is, well, Melody, why is storytelling so important? Why not summaries and quizzes and side panels and, all that? Well, they're all good, but storytelling in particular, because humans are storytellers. That's just who we are, right? Children, if you watch children play, they're playing out stories a lot of the times, right? They're doing that make believe. We tell ourselves stories all day long. We have what's called a narrative that runs through our head about the world. And so we're constantly telling ourselves stories. Oh, I really need coffee in the morning to get anything done during the day. That's a story we tell ourselves, and non-coffee drinkers will go, no, you don't. It's just a story you're telling yourself. We tell so many stories that when we go to sleep at night, we continue to tell stories to ourselves while we are sleeping. So stories are just embedded in our humanity. And some studies have been done, and so stories will be remembered 22 times better than if you just give someone facts. So if you just give someone a plain fact, they're likely to forget it. But if you wrap it up in a story, they're more likely to understand it and remember it and be able to apply it, right? So that's why we are telling stories, right? We're helping them understand the story, or we're helping them understand the information. We're helping them retain the information, and we're helping them apply the information. And stories do all three of those things really, really, really well. They also build our empathy. So if you want people to empathize, if you want people to feel while they're reading your book, which you do, because that's an important part of being human, then stories will also help you bring in that emotional fluidity, I call it, into your books, into what you're explaining, teaching, the message you're giving to the world. So that's why we tell stories. Stories help us synthesize information, organize new information. They help us kind of try things out, trying out our values or our morals. They teach us things. So stories are really versatile. And that's why I think that you should have stories in your, definitely have stories in your book. All right, so I've touched on it a little bit, but let's look at it a little bit more on how to use story. You don't want to just tell random stories just because stories are important. But in your book, if you have a new value you want someone to consider, a way to express, you want to help them find a way to express their emotion, or if you have a fact or a figure or a statistic, and you want them to not necessarily remember the exact statistic, but you want to remember, oh, it's a high number, it's important because. So anytime you have something like that you want them to remember, that you want them to understand, retain, and apply to their own lives, you want to take that fact, that figure, that statistic, that piece of information, the value, and you want to embed it or show it through a story, so that they can see how they might use it, and they'll remember it better that way. Because we remember things that matter to us, that are practical to us, that make sense to us. So I'll give you an example. If you're writing a book about the history of Chicago, and you come to the idea of Chicago, we call it the Windy City. Why do we call it the Windy City? Well, if you ask people, they might tell you that we call it the Windy City because there's always a breeze coming off the lake, right? In the summer, in the hot summer, you go to the beach and there'll be a breeze coming off the lake. Or that the tall buildings, wind whips around the tall buildings, and that's why it's called the Windy City. But Chicago is not windier than any other city in the United States. That's a fact. Now, that's not a fact you are going to remember long after this video is done. In fact, you're going to hear it, drop it, move on. Probably not important to you unless you live in Chicago or you're planning on visiting there. So why was it called the Windy City? I want this to be something that you remember. So why was it called the Windy City? If I give you the story around that, that's going to help you remember. So back in the 1800s, there was this rivalry between Cincinnati and Chicago. And Cincinnati had a sports team called the what was it called? The Red Stockings. Think Red Sox. And Chicago created a rival team called the White Stockings. Think White Sox. Well, a Cincinnati journalist thought that the city's elite were being quite egotistical and vain around this, and so called them windbags. And so in later writings referred to Chicago as the Windy City, because the elite were windbags and they were spewing their hot air about the sports team. And so there was this rivalry, and a journalist coined this term Windy City to insult the rival, the rival team, the elites from Chicago. And it stuck. In fact, later on, when New York lost the World Fair to Chicago, a New York journalist then referred to Chicago as the Windy City once again. Now, this was not a positive term at the time. Now we call Chicago the Windy City, and we don't think about it as, oh, this is negative or derogatory. But it was. And it's no longer that, because Chicago has changed that image, right? Chicago has expropriated that nickname or liberated that nickname. And now they use it. And that's it. There's no negative around it that I've ever heard anyways. So that's the story of how Chicago came to be the Windy City. It is not windier or less windy or windier than any other American city. And that's the story. So if you give a story around a fact, then people are going to understand it, remember it, and be able to apply it to their lives. And those are the three big reasons that you use story. And how you use it is you take a fact and you find a way to weave a story into that, bringing that fact into, or to exemplify that fact, or show that fact, or a new skill, or whatever it is. And that's how you use story in your book. Now, you don't have to have like a big story all the way through the book. You don't have to have a big story all the way through the book. So an example, the wealthy barber, he had this big story that he weaved all the way through his nonfiction book. You don't have to do that. You can, if you wish, have shorter stories. So you can have a chapter on a particular topic and have a story about something specific, a specific person. And in the next chapter, it can be a different topic and a different story about a different person. So you can have a big story that weaves through, or you can have short stories or little shorter stories or almost anecdotes in the chapters to help you remember, or to help your readers remember, right? All right. So then the next question we're going to answer is the story architecture. Like, how do you put these stories together? So I like stories that are character-based, and most people like stories that are character-based because we are looking to connect with a character, right? We as people, that's what we're doing. We are looking to connect with others. There's also plot-based stories, but they are not as popular as character-based stories. So you want to start your story with a character, and the character is the first C of storytelling. So I have a series of C's for storytelling, and character is the first one. Let's name them all. So there's the C's of storytelling are character and context, catalyst, challenges, change, and consequence. So we start with character. Who is this story about? What do we need to know about this character that's going to help us? Now, in your nonfiction book, you're going to create a character that is similar to the people reading the book so that they can empathize with them, so they connect with them. And then you want to give them a context. That's the second C. So this character lives in a context. So if I'm the character, it's going to make a big difference whether I'm living here in Canada or whether I'm living in Germany or whether I'm living in China or whether I'm at the library or the beach. And so you want to give them some kind of context, and context could be cultural, geographical, political, familial, so family culture. It could be anything that they need to know, circumstance, year, anything that your reader needs to know, and only what they need to know. Don't give people extra information about the character or the context. You want to keep this as short as possible. So what is that absolute need to know about the character and the context? And once we know that, the next C is the catalyst. And the catalyst is what pushes your character into the story or pulls them into the story, either or. So it doesn't matter, but it's what starts the story. And once the story is started, your character, this person that your readers empathize with, they hit challenges, right? They have obstacles, they have things they need to face. And so in a big story, if you have one story interweaved throughout your entire book, there will be many, many, many challenges. Think about like Indiana Jones and all the challenges he had in his movies to solve the mystery and get the treasure. But if you have short stories in your chapter, then you just need one challenge. Here's the character, here's the context, really quick. Here's that one challenge that relates to the topic of this chapter. And then, of course, the change. So how does the character overcome this challenge? What do they do? And how does overcoming that challenge change your character? And that's the next C, change. So we have a character in a context. There's a catalyst that starts the story. And along the story, they have challenges or a challenge, depending on how long the story is. For each challenge, they change in some way. Overcoming the challenge makes them change in some way. And from there, there's a consequence. And generally in storytelling in your nonfiction book, the consequence is that they have a better life. They have the outcome that the reader wants. So those are the C's of storytelling. Once more, you have a character in a context. There's a catalyst that starts the story. And then this character has challenges or a challenge or challenges they have to face. Each challenge, they change. Somehow the challenges change them. And because of that, there is a consequence. The world is a different place, or the person is a different place. The person is a different person. They're better. They are where the reader wants to be. And that's the architecture of stories. So if you're writing a nonfiction book, look at the promise, the main point of each chapter, the main learning or the statistic or the value or the lesson or the skill, and think, how can I build a story around that? Maybe you have a client who you could, change their name and change some of the things about it, but you can still use the kind of the structure of that client's story in order to tell that story in that chapter. So readers who haven't had that experience yet can learn through the experience of the character in the book. And they don't have to be true stories, although if you're writing a nonfiction book, you probably have lots of true stories that you can tell, right? So don't forget, one of the most important elements in your nonfiction book are the stories you tell. And if you have any questions about it, please just drop them in the comments, and I'd love to answer them. Also, you can also check out my other website, melodyanowin.com. I'll drop that in the description. I do storytelling courses and coaching, and I love stories. So if you have any questions about stories, please let me know. What are we doing next week? Next Wednesday, come by, because we are going to be talking about beginnings and endings. Usually when you're writing a book, you don't start at the beginning or at the end. Usually you kind of write the middle first, and then at the end you come back and you do beginnings and endings. We'll be looking at front matter and back matter next week. I will see you then. Thank you for joining me today.